Welcome. This is the ConnectWise Automate to RMM webinar series. This is a three-part series about what you need to know before you look at doing a transition between the two products and potentially how to actually go about that transition once you've decided that that's right for you. Today is part one, the evaluation. Quick introduction to those who are not familiar with Stack Advisors. We started Stack back in 2011, and it came out of our MSP that we founded in 2002. We added ConnectWise in 2005, and then spent the next 8 years developing our skills as an MSP, ultimately growing to 65 employees before we exited the MSP in 2015. Now, during that run, as I mentioned, we founded Stack Advisors in 2011. And really that was born out of an intense focus on the automation that we developed and evolved really into ConnectWise power users. And we saw the need within the ecosystem to really help a lot of other MSPs that were struggling to overcome the challenges of really using the tools to support their efficiency and become more profitable. And I've been lucky enough to lead this team as we've evolved over the years. And we continually look to focus and improve around automation, product customizations, and filling those gaps within the ConnectWise ecosystem around the products, around the ConnectWise suite of products. Now, our team performs optimizations around the use of the tools, looking really at process automation through customization, consulting, engagement, collaboration, and then an ongoing management services. What we're trying to do is to really help and enable MSPs to get the most from their investment in the tools. And this includes even leveraging things like our automated deployment tool, MSP Toolshed, which again really focuses around taking a process, a complex process, and automate it. And then the other thing that we're doing, and we're looking at piloting very soon here, we actually have a few clients that we're starting to roll out with this, is an automation maturity model. And if many of you are familiar with the Service Leadership's OML or the ConnectWise modes theory, this program lines up in tandem to really give that additional focus around the tools and how the tools can be used to support those initiatives. And we do this through setting goals and milestones as you progress. But today, what we are going to go focus on is ConnectWise RMM. And ConnectWise RMM obviously is the new monitoring tool, but it's a little bit more than that. It's also the first product from the ConnectWise portfolio to go live on the Asio platform. And I'll touch a little bit on that later. What is relevant here, or why this is relevant, is because this tool and its early foundations were started by Continuum when they began really the development of a new command architecture, probably 2.5 to 3 years prior to the acquisition, which has been a couple of years ago. So ConnectWise acquires Continuum, and I suspect that this work, this foundational work around Asio and around what has evolved into RMM living on top of that platform, I suspect that this is part of the reason that they looked at this acquisition, was to really enable that path, accelerate it for their creation to become a platform, because it's very clear that that's what they want to do and where they're heading, as well as creating a modern cloud-based RMM. Now, if you remember a number of years ago, they were talking about how they could bring Automate to the cloud and make it a true cloud type of platform. And this, I think, was a real step when they started to realize what was involved with that. So initially, RMM's release seemed underwhelming. A lot of us that looked at it, there were features that were still under development. The UI actually resembled Command in a lot of ways. And most people really didn't look or pay much attention to it because they were freaking out about the future of Automate, which I will also touch on here in a bit. Now, they did a lot of work on the back end. They began to leverage what's referred to as a continuous integration and continuous delivery method, right? CI/CD, and this is an agile style of development. And the concept is doing rapid releases, releasing microservices, so quickly innovating and releasing features as they go along. As of the last conversation that we have, there's been over 900 updates since early 2022, all the way up until today. Now, sometimes these releases have multiple features in it. Sometimes they do multiple releases in a week, and this shows that the product is evolving fast. Now, that in itself, that quick evolution of this product has also been a bit of a problem for consultants like ours, for MSPs that are trying to evaluate it, as well as I think a number of teams internally ConnectWise. The information on these new features, especially critical functions that start to parallel what Automate users are doing, they're not always communicated. And so there seems to be a bit of a disconnect in the community between individuals like us, between MSPs that are looking to do this, and between ConnectWise as to what is and isn't available yet. Eventually, this is going to get caught up. Don't get me wrong. Something we are diligently working on trying to identify and understand when these things are coming so we can better help advise our clients about the right time and the right path to go forward with this potentially with moving to this product. Now, the last thing I want to be clear about is that Automate's future is fine. The tool is still the most powerful, customizable, only on-prem option out there for those that need that on-prem option. ConnectWise knows that this product is still the best fit for a lot of organizations. And not only are they going to continue to let this live on, but they're actually going to continue to do some development for it and allow the community to help drive the product and decide if and when it's time to actually look at an end of life. And that brings me to what is important around the Asio platform. And I mentioned this, and what I want to point out is the significance of what this means, not only for Automate's future, but also for RMM. There are three key things that stand out to me when I look at this graphic, and this is from IT Nation this last November. The three things really that stand out here is that the data layer and the automation engine, they're continuing to evolve inside the platform. They had to spend a number of years getting this platform up to speed so that they could start to look at how to bring together all of this data into a data lake, right? So you no longer have this really complex table, you don't have redundancy in data, right? This starts to solidify the data. And that allows the automation engine to continue to keep evolving. The other piece here is that second layer, which is around the core services. And this is really important because what it's going to do is these products evolve, as the platform evolves, and as pieces start to pull into this, is that you're going to have the same data used by each one of these modules instead of replicating data across the product. And right now, even with RMM, just like Automate, you're replicating client data in the different tool sets. What this is going to do is bring that all together. This means that Automate is also going to be able to leverage the platform's innovation, just like RMM and the other tools. And that ties directly into the third point here when I look at what this is all about. And that is the term unified monitoring, meaning they are looking at bringing together multiple monitoring tools and services into a cohesive set of tools. So this is not just RMM and Automate, but these are other tools, cloud monitoring, security monitoring, et cetera. So the idea here is that the Asio platform starts to establish these three pieces that they can use going forward. Now, this is also important because it leads me back to the Automate roadmap. This was presented at IT Nation. It's something that Josh and I were fortunate enough to get a little bit of inside out, be able to ask some very direct questions about what this meant. What's in the circle? I apologize if it's hard to read, but this says integration with Asio and new innovation. And what's really, really important here is that it shows that Automate is now going to be able to tap into all of that innovation that's going to happen into that data lake, into the modular pieces that are that Asio is going to allow all of these products to tap into. So whether you feel RMM is right for you now, maybe later, maybe way, way, way later, the tool set, the pieces around Automate and that integration into Asio, it just proves that the value of your investment into this product and the continued investment into this product is a good choice, right? You're not making the wrong choice if you decide that RMM is not ready for you right now. So let me get into a little bit about what the specifics are for RMM. I want to touch on some progress. I've shared this in some of the previous webinars that we've done around this. I mentioned the continuous development style, and so far they have at least 220 out-of-box actions or tasks that are developed by ConnectWise. Now you can duplicate these and customize them to create your own custom actions. They have mostly the same functionality. They are a little bit limited. A way to think of this for those of you that are familiar with Automate is that actions in RMM are similar to commands in Automate. I want to be clear that they're not scripts, that they're steps, right? That the action or the task is part of the script. And that layers into improvements that they've done within the scripting engine. And they built this scripting engine over the last couple of years. They've done a lot of work to create this within RMM. They continue to work on it and enhance its functionality. They have added some ability around custom defined fields, which will make this more functional. And I'll talk a little bit about feature parity in a bit. The other thing, there's about 1,100 out-of-box monitors. They're referred to as Intellimon for those that aren't familiar with it. Again, these are created by ConnectWise. These are not something that vendors can create at this time. If you need to customize it, you can duplicate and customize it as an MSP. They have finally started to do some enhancements around custom fields, which those that know Automate, these would be considered EDS. And they potentially are going to give more functionality around tasks, action scripts, policies, etc. They have also added in some vendor-defined fields, and this starts to open the door for some integrations. There's still a lot of limitations around it. There's some key roadblocks, but this is a great step to being able to allow third parties to start to integrate into RMM, because we can now look at inserting and associating data within the RMM interface. The last little piece here that they've done from a progress standpoint is the dynamic groups, an enhancement around dynamic groups. These are similar in a way to data views and Automate, right? So it's a way for you to be able to find and search. There's still some nuances that are being worked out, but that's really where the parallel is. Now, there is still a catch. The reality is that RMM was intentionally built differently than Automate. It's part of what gives it an exciting future, but we have to be realistic. RMM is not going to be one for one with Automate. It wasn't designed that way, and it wasn't intended that way. Now, ConnectWise feels in a lot of ways that they have a level of core feature parity right now between Automate and RMM. I highly recommend what I'm going to share with you today and through the rest of this webinar series, or if you engage with us directly, is that a readiness assessment is absolutely what you're going to need to prepare for, so that RMM is not just a shiny object that seems new and great, right? It will get there. And we really believe that eventually RMM is going to be able to accomplish the same things Automate will, but how you get there, how you achieve those results is going to be different. It's going to be a different journey, and it's going to be a different way to get there, right? But for a lot of MSPs, this tool, RMM, may not be there yet. So it's very important to go through and do this analysis. So one of the first things you have to realize is that RMM is still going to require configuration and tweaking and adjustments and engagement within it. You can't just turn this thing on and expect it to work. It is made to be simpler. It is made to have more out of the box. You still need to configure this. There's not an MSP on this call right now that doesn't do something uniquely different than either their competition or their friends or MSPs all around the world. You need to recognize that and understand that. And I want to give you some ways to sort of identify that as we go forward. You need to get SSO. You need to have it enabled and working. You need to have this across the product. Pretty straightforward. Verify that company sites and services in RMM, which has been rolling out, is actually going to work and map the way that you need it to. This is something that came after they released the product. It is an addition, very similar to clients, locations, and sites within the other ConnectWise products. This is something they've been rolling out. It's something that you need to look at and understand, how is this going to affect it? Now, it may be able to achieve that same result. There is some searchability around this now. However, understand that those hierarchies are going to be different, and it's very important when you get into the next steps of this to be able to map that out. Ticket mapping is limited. There are some limitations as far as what you can do with mapping tickets. Right now, you can only map to 2 boards, and there's a lot of limitations around the categories and how you can map that. What this does is this means that you will have to start to look at workflows to be able to manipulate and move tickets around the same way. I don't know if there's going to be enhancements. They have said perhaps that they will look at allowing you to do this more, but they wanted to try to keep this simple to begin with. They didn't want to overcomplicate the setup or the interface. There's something in here that we've heard referrals to in the past around product tiers and what you can and can't monitor is around features. Before you go from Automate or any other RMM over to the new ConnectWise RMM, you need to make sure and check what tier you're going to be on to see if you even are going to be close with feature parity. Okay, this is again something else that's important, something that may not come out through that sales cycle, but you need to validate and verify, hey, am I going to have the ability to do these advanced features or not? The last piece is obviously understanding and identifying custom items that you have created in your Automate, right? That we have partnered with you to create, that you've created on your own, that your various, the chain of engineers that have been in there, you got to find these things. They're really, really important in how Automate functions, and they're going to be important to be able to understand and replicate that data when you get into RMM. Okay, that's a setup. So what is next, right? Part one is the evaluation. And this is what we refer to as the readiness assessment. Okay, and it's here. I'm going to take you through this. There's a number of steps that we're going to go through, and I'm going to go through each one of these steps to try to give you an idea of what you need to look at in your existing tool before you start to go into step 2, which is the preparation, and step 3, which is the migration, to actually move over to the product itself. Right? Step 1, word soup. One of the first differences between these products is the vocabulary, a totally different vernacular, and you need to get these straight when you start to look at the product. And in next month's webinar, when we start to talk about preparation, it's going to be really important to understand what maps between each piece. Between now and then, one of my asks is that you go and you take a look and try to understand what these are. Ignite versus Intellimon, right? We're talking about the in-house monitors, templates versus policies, what you apply, scripts versus actions, tasks, and commands, the EDF and how that translates over to custom fields, or an EDF that's going to disappear because the vendor-defined field isn't there yet. And understanding the difference between a group search, right, data views, et cetera, and dynamic groups. You need to know, because when you start to get in RMM and you need help and you look at the help documentation, it's not going to be the same as Automate. So this is the first thing that's really important, step 1. Step 2, monitoring. So take that terminology, get your terminology cheat sheet, post it to the wall, and then go into the next step. And that next step is the evaluation. And this evaluation is really going to be one of the more complex pieces of it. And it has to do with all of the layers that really, truly affect monitoring. So an easy place to start first is understanding what exists in the massive Intellimon library. If you remember, I said it's over 1,100 items that are in there. You need to take a look at it. You need to analyze it. And you need to understand not just what's there from the documentation standpoint, but verify what you get as part of your product tier. Understanding what's there is going to allow you to map that to what you have now. The next thing to do is to look high level at what you have within your current Automate tool, right? Start mapping what you have, what's currently there, what you are currently doing for monitoring, so you can get a sense at a high level of what to mix and match as you start to evaluate where you're going to be moving these things over to RMM. That actual mapping of those, that identifying that starts to come in phase 2, which is really around the preparation step. Identifying your custom items is perhaps the most vital of all of this evaluation. It's going to build the basis for you mapping and your mapping exercises as you get into that preparation phase. It helps evaluate if something was custom built and may or may not actually exist natively in RMM. There are certainly differences in what you get out of the box. So this starts to help you evaluate that, because you don't want to duplicate, right? You don't want to go through and duplicate monitoring. You don't want to say, I need this custom monitor, but then it actually exists in there. So this is really going to help you avoid that duplication. And it's also going to give you a reference point against what you've done post-migration. You want to make sure when you go through this process that you actually have replicated, or not replicated, but that you have actually duplicated nothing. You've replicated what's in your system, and that you're actually monitoring what you say you're going to monitor. Very important in how you deliver services to your client. Now, I mentioned changes to ticket routing and how those map into manage. The current functionality in RMM, again, only gives you 2 boards and no map categories. Look at your Automate to manage integration. Take a look at how you are currently mapping tickets. What service boards do they go to? When they go to the service board, what status? Is there something specific to a client? Is there an agreement specific to a client? And then go look at what you do with those tickets from a workflow standpoint natively or already within Manage. because if they aren't coming in the same way, you cannot apply those same workflow rules to it, and you're going to have to adjust that. So this isn't just an RMM migration and you're good to go. You need to think about how this data goes into manage, something we feel very strongly about, and it's very important. Understand how that is working. Now, the last piece that you can look at here is identifying what it is that you may not need. What are some of the items that, these custom items that maybe you don't need anymore? There is a cleanup opportunity. So again, whether you decide that you want to move from Automate to RMM in the next 3 months or the next 6 months or the next 9 months, what a great opportunity you have to clean things up, right? You can identify in monitoring what is necessary. What are these custom fields that I don't use anymore? Make note of these. You don't have to go clean them up right away, but make note of these, because getting all of this in line before you start your prep and before you actually start your migration is going to save you a lot of time of back and forth and back and forth. Step 3, scripting. Now, scripting is going to be complex, but it should have fewer layers than monitoring. Remember, monitoring, you're going to have monitors, you're going to have maybe monitors that you've duplicated and customized for specific clients, et cetera. So understand that there is going to be a complexity around the scripts itself, but maybe not as many layers. You still need to really scrutinize everything that you're doing and evaluate how you're doing it today. Take note of the variables, the triggers that you have, the actions that you're performing, and what format your script is in. Is it using the native engine or PowerShell? Because when you get into mapping these over to RMM and saying, this is a script that I have, and I need to now figure out what tasks this is. Do I use a policy to do this? Is there an action? Do I need to go create a custom script, et cetera? You now have that map so you can easily look at what you need to do. It's also going to help you identify and begin preparation for scripts and automation that you are going to have to rebuild manually. I put intensive here on purpose. And that is that if you have a lot of scripts that are using the Automate scripting engine and you haven't started to make these available in PowerShell or Bash, ready to transport over and use in other tools, you're going to have to recreate these. And that could be a lot. There's not going to be any kind of migration tool when it comes to a lot of these really custom scripts. They just can't do it. So it's important to mark these. Doesn't mean that you have to get rid of them right away, but it is important to mark these so that as you start to move forward, you can identify and understand exactly what they are. That's the good thing about this process, is because as you mark these for transition, as you say, this is something that I may need to look over, you can say, how am I going to go rebuild this in PowerShell? Because of regardless of when you migrate, again, whether it's now or in the future, what you're going to do is you're going to secure future portability. We're all very clear, Microsoft wants Intune on every single machine. Microsoft leverages PowerShell. The nice part is Automate leverages PowerShell. RMM leverages PowerShell. If you take your automation, and this is something we have been recommending and we've been assisting people with for quite some time, is to create these tools within PowerShell. That makes it portable. That allows you to use it in a tool. And potentially that allows you to use it across a very diverse set of clients that maybe some have Intune, you can leverage it, maybe some don't, and you can leverage that within RMM or Automate. You're building out this future portability. Again, I'm not saying you need to go rush out and do this and then go over to RMM. You can go do this and then decide if you need to go over to RMM. That is step 3, scripting. All right, step 4, patching. Yes, patching. We all love patching. Now, the patching engine was updated when they built ConnectWise RMM in Asio, which is a good thing because it's basically solid. The patching configuration is basically solid. And from our evaluations, it gets about 85% of the way to what we consider best practice patching recommendations. And that's okay. There are things that you're going to find easier within this tool around like approvals, for example. However, I want to point out, you are going to lose granularity. So if you have complex patching schemes, especially ones that involve either detailed location, client-specific, or a very unique set of things, you have to pay attention when you start to evaluate RMM. Make note of what this patching is and why there's an exception, because you need to make sure that you can achieve the same result in RMM. And be sure to do this on a client by client basis, right? Review each one of the clients, take a look at the configurations, make note of these deviations from the standard plans. It's very obvious to every single one of us that has either been in MSP, continues to operate in MSP, helps MSPs, that patching continually gets tweaked, but it's really rare that it gets reviewed until it actually causes an issue. And then we have to go back and go through this reset and a realignment, which is okay, but it's not something that people tend to maintain on a regular basis. You bring clients on, you bring clients out. You think of an exception, you have the CEO of a company that needs something, you're going to go in there and you're going to make a modification. One of your engineers who may not even be with your company anymore made a modification. It's really important client by client to review this so you can then go and try to set this up when you get into the next phase around mapping. The other thing here that I want to point out is that there are positives around all of this. And one of them is that this is a great opportunity to identify what type of things that you've made exceptions for that maybe you shouldn't continue to make exceptions for. And this is an opportunity to start to force clients into a standardization, to use a singular patching schedule. I can tell you that most of our larger clients, the more mature MSPs, have adopted this patching method. Very few exceptions to it. They explain to the client, this is really important, this is when we do it, and the more we deviate, the more chances are that you are going to be left out. So this is a great opportunity as you evaluate, as you do this cleanup, find and identify things that maybe you can start to standardize, make your operations simple, right? Align your tools, make things easier for you. Step 5, other considerations. And this is the last step for the first piece of this evaluation phase. There are other things that you need to consider here and make note of before going into the next phase, which is really the preparation piece of this. Now, obviously, I skipped over things like identifying the clients and contacts and cleanup, basic configurations, et cetera. Look, listen, be sure that you verify all of these and that the updated company sites and services is going to work before you move over. But a lot of these things are really table stakes that have to exist. They're known. And I want to make sure that we're pointing out some of the things you may not be thinking of. Those types of items, they become important when you get into the mapping, especially as you start to identify and look at custom items that are very unique or specific, or maybe even required that you deliver to your client. Deal with that in the preparation phase, right? And the validation phase after you've done a migration. So in November, we were told that a migration tool was being developed and that the tool would be released in 2 phases. The first phase would be simple to do things like I just talked about with companies, contacts, configurations, et cetera. And the second would look at monitoring, maybe even identify some of the custom scripting that you've done to say, here's what we can and can't pull over, or maybe it's as simple as, oh, here's a PowerShell we can pull over. That's sort of what the second piece was going to be. I know that they've been working on it. I've heard rumors that it may or may not exist, but as of today, we have not seen nor tested it. And while the choice is yours, I would not recommend that a client use it without an expert such as us going through and validating it, or you going through a process to validate that this tool is actually going to work. Okay, it hasn't been tested in mass, and it hasn't been tested in the very unique nature that Automate presents to move over to RMM. A simple migration setup from scratch, right? All good reasons to go. I highly recommend being very cautious around a migration tool. There are also limited integrations. Understand that up until recently, vendors have not really had the ability to create any kind of integration into the tool, despite what's been mentioned. The integrations are very simple data. There's not a lot of action or interaction with it. This is improving. Don't get me wrong. This is really important. It is something that is going to improve. Bringing everything into the Asio platform is going to make these incredibly powerful. I think all of us at Stack are really excited about what that opportunity can mean for the future. But right now, understand that as you are evaluating, as you are going through and looking at your Automate, how you're going to migrate over, identify what other tools you're using. Because if there's something critical that you need in RMM, it's probably not integrated yet. And you need to decide whether you can live with that by going back and using the vendor portal separately, or whether you really need that data to go in. Progress will happen. Don't get me wrong. This is very important, I think, both to the vendors and ConnectWise. It's just not quite there yet. There is, however, some other positives here too, which is bundling this with other ConnectWise products and services. This could give you the ability to add something maybe that you have. There's also a much more robust network monitoring tool, and there have been a lot of improvements around that. So if that's something you need, it is certainly something to look and evaluate. Now, at one point, they were talking about RMM and Automate completely run in tandem, and you could use both products on every machine. That's not exactly true. These tools are not designed to necessarily run in tandem on a machine, but there may be a mixed use case out there that, again, needs to be discovered and vetted, where perhaps you're using one tool for a network and server monitoring, something else for desktop monitoring, et cetera. So there may be a combination out there. I know some large MSPs have tried it or looked at this option. How these play together, again, is going to be difficult until the Asio platform starts to bring in a lot of these modular pieces. But if you need this improved network monitoring, if you need something really solid, you don't want to go outside of the ConnectWise ecosystem for it, this tool has definitely made improvements on there. And as I mentioned, this Asio platform, it is the foundation. And going forward, the future of the ConnectWise products is going to be centered around it. This is a good thing. This is a really good thing because of those layers that I talked about. What that gives not only vendors like your regular ISVs, consultants like us, you as an MSP, that gives the ability to start to not replicate data, not have things go back and forth through a sync, but actually manage and work within the data and have the tools plug into it, right? So a lot of excitement. I know that sounds kind of little clandestine about what it is doing, but understand that there's going to be huge advantages. And Automate tying into this, just like RMM is going to tie into this, is going to allow for a lot of innovation in the future. All right, before we get to questions, let me summarize here. What are the next steps? Now, I'm putting these up here because what would be great is if you can go and start to do some of this before the preparation, right? I understand that may be a lot to try to tackle, but it's important. You need to learn the terms. You need to understand how these things even compare before you get into mapping anything. You need to understand your monitoring, identifying the custom items, list your scripts, look what you have that can transport over, look at what you can't do, and then review patching, finding opportunities in all of these to clean up, to standardize, to really mature your use of the tool. Now, what else can I do? If you are like most of us, you're getting the push on moving to RMM from the ConnectWise team. They're very excited. They want to get a lot of people over there. It might actually be a great fit for you. And I would be happy to have a side conversation or a one-on-one conversation about how that might happen and how this tool might really fit for you. But you also have to understand that RMM right now may be missing some key functions that you cannot live without as an MSP. They're coming, or a way for them to happen is coming. It's something that we at Stack Advisors are intent on solving, right? It's what we do. We solve these issues, and we solve these issues for MSPs that don't have the capacity or resources to do it. So as these challenges come up, that's what we're focusing on. We've done these with Automate. We're doing these with RMM. And just like ConnectWise, we want this tool to be successful, right? We want to continue and expand how we're evaluating it, how we're helping you plan, how we're helping people migrate, and how we continue to build automation into the tool itself. But do yourself a favor. You need to check the features you're using and verify that they actually indeed exist within the tool and at the tier that you have within RMM. If they don't, is there a way for you to achieve the same result? And if you can't, it's okay. It doesn't mean that it's a never. It just means it's not ready now, and continue to use the tool that you know so well. The other thing here is that Stack Advisors has an RMM readiness assessment. This is an analysis and an export of custom items to help you identify and expedite conversations, help you understand what it is you need to go into from the mapping standpoint, as well as planning for a migration project. Is this something that we can help you with? Obviously, if you're clients, these are minimal projects that we do as an add-on. This is going to become obviously a big part, I think, of every conversation that any MSP is looking at if they're using Automate and looking to move to RMM. And then the last piece is the 2 additional sessions here, right? Part 2 coming up in about a month, and part 3 coming up in about 2 months, right? So we're going to talk preparation in the next session, and we are going to talk migration in that third session. And that is it. I did see